Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to season 2 of Wearable Takeover. You know what? We really should have something to celebrate, with like the little bazookas or something like that. But we are excited, people. Guess what? We got through 2022 when we launched Wearable Takeover. And I was just looking at some of the notes that I created when developing this podcast. And there were components that I wanted to incorporate that we did not incorporate because we were just trying to get our feel for how we were going to bring on our guests and work with the platform. But let me tell you something. We're going to introduce some of those components that were in the original plan in season 2. So, what does that mean? Well, there's going to be 2 new components to the Wearable Takeover podcast show. Number one, you're going to be able to share your 30-second elevator pitch with us. Yes. So, if there is a product that you would like to see us develop within our wearable tech ecosystem, you're going to have the opportunity to look in the show notes and pitch that product to us so that we can work with you or develop it on your behalf, perhaps in one of our hackathons. And then we are going to also showcase a platform where we showcase products that you can find on Amazon, one of our premier partners. And we're going to ask your opinion, this or that. So we'll provide some of those products. We want to get your feedback. If you were in a position to purchase one or try one out, which one would you try out? Sounds interesting, right? Well, don't worry about it. Again, all of that will be available in the show notes, and especially when we get all of our social media back up, because we got hacked, right? Yeah, I know we didn't make that too public, but anyway, we are back, and I am super excited because we have one of the premier talented mental health therapists that's going to help us, one, assess what we did in 2022 and help us prepare and thrive in 2023. Notice I didn't say strive. Notice I said thrive. And this is Baltimore's own Rashad Mills. He is an accomplished licensed clinical professional counselor, speaker. He's a powerful speaker, guys. You got to check out his social media. An author, and he's a podcast host. You got to check out the episode we did together like a couple years ago. It was amazing. Rashad Mills is responsible for assisting clients as they navigate many of the challenges that life presents them with. And I know within our ecosystem, when we talk about our focuses on the underrepresented founder, those that are underestimated, you already deal with a lot of challenges. And so Rashad is going to help us identify some of the things that we can incorporate, as well as some of the mechanisms that we can deal with so that we can face life head on and be successful with it. But let me tell you something. Prior to Rashad taking on his role as this multi-hyphenated counselor, speaker, author, and podcast host, he worked closely with many young people in Baltimore City in a lot of different roles, and he was a paraeducator in the Baltimore City School system. And so he was also a mental health professional at the Baltimore City Juvenile Center. So Rashad has always combined his life and educational experiences to empower the people he serves. And I'm so honored to know Rashad. I've seen him in action. He is a product of Baltimore City and Baltimore County Public School systems. He earned his Bachelors of Arts in Telecommunications from Morgan State University and his Master's of Science in Counseling from Johns Hopkins University. In his spare time, you might find him spending time with his adorable twin daughters, working out, reading a good book, watching sports, or his favorite pastime, napping. Oh, you know what? Let's give it up virtually everybody for Rashad Mills. Rashad, how are you?
I am exceptional. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for having me. I'm exceptional. I'm honored to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. And, Rashad, before we even get into all the clinical stuff and, helping people navigate the new year, and there's a lot of events that have happened recently in media, right? So we're definitely going to touch on that. But I got to know, what has been your favorite book of 2022?
Oh, that's a really, really
Yeah,
interesting
I like to
question.
put people on the spot.
That's a really, really interesting question. Actually, I'm gonna go from a different perspective in terms of my favorite book for 2022. It was an audiobook, and I'm an old school guy. I like to have the physical book in hand. And it was called Can My Child Play?
Oh,
And it was a book by a gentleman, and I don't know if you're familiar with, in 2019, his son, Jordan McNair, was a young football player at the University of Maryland. And unfortunately, he died as a result of a heat stroke. And I connected with his dad, and we were, I said, hey, I think it would be a great story for you to come on and talk about the resiliency that you had as a father to continue life after your son has passed and all of the challenges that you had to go through, legislation, passing new bills, dealing with the stuff at the University of Maryland, where you found somebody was at fault and quite a bit of neglect was ultimately resulted in your son passing, and sort of this incredible spirit of how do I go on with my life after burying my son. And it was a phenomenal audiobook. Can My Child Play? About 4 or 5 hours long. And I started listening to it and I literally couldn't stop. Like, I took my kids to school and was listening to it, you know, went back in the house and I was listening to it. And it was like, literally, it was so very powerful and impactful. And the main takeaway for me was, when we are faced with trauma and tragedy, we can do one of two things. Number one, we can allow ourselves to be completely absorbed by it and not make any forward progress as a result of it, right? Or we can do two, we can allow ourselves to experience the trauma, right? Sit in it, but yet find out how we can take this very tragic moment and turn it into a bit of triumph, right? And sort of switch the tables around. And this gentleman did it by starting the Jordan McNair Foundation. And he goes across the globe, really educating people on heat-related illnesses, students, athletes, coaches. And I think it's just a phenomenal story. And again, as a parent myself, you mentioned twin girls, like, I could not imagine LaKisha burying my kids. I could not imagine to get a call and say, hey, we have to pull the plug, or what that next day is like, or going into, a funeral and your baby is there, but
Mm-hmm.
yet still having this spirit of resiliency. And I know I'm using that word repetitively, but just that was this incredible spirit of resiliency. And so that was my favorite book. That was my favorite book, just for a variety of reasons. But Can My Child Play?
All right, so that sounds interesting. You educated me just now, and I have seen the McNair Foundation tables at many conferences and
Hmm.
expos or whatnot. So they are definitely out there doing the work. And again, with ties to Maryland, as if you guys don't know, we are a global ecosystem. We have founders in 4 continents, but we were founded and we are currently still in Maryland, Baltimore,
Hmm.
Maryland. So thank you for that read. You said something pretty interesting. You said allow yourself to feel the trauma. And let's just, kind of back it up a little bit. We're transitioning, or by the time our listeners hear this, it will be 2023.
Hmm.
We've already experienced the pandemic, something that we've never seen before. Maybe our great grandparents or grandparents, may have experienced the flu pandemic or epidemic that happened, over 100 years ago. But this was the first time we've experienced something like that. And that was traumatic
Hmm.
on many different levels, right? And so when we think about what we're dealing with here with developing and driving innovation, especially as, again, underrepresented, underestimated founders, what that really means: Black, brown, female,
Hmm.
other gendered, otherly abled. There's a lot of bias, there's a lot of discrimination, imposter syndrome, etc. So there's a lot of trauma. So if I were to make a sandwich, it's like trauma on trauma on trauma
Hmm.
on trauma, right? So how can one feel the trauma and come out on the other side successfully?
That's a great question. So when I say feel the trauma, and you may hear the term give the trauma space, I
Mm,
think one of the greatest disservices that we do is when we have traumatic moments, we try to rush through them because we don't want to feel that level of discomfort. And the human body is designed what? To do anything to avoid pain. Let's think about it. Any kind of trauma that we experience, whether it's divorce, whether it's grief, whether it's some physical ailment, certainly mental health ailments, we do anything we can to avoid it. And I always encourage my clients to think about, give yourself space to sit in the trauma, understand what it is, and understand that it is a process. Understand that I can't push my way through, for an example, I couldn't push my way through this global pandemic and just get to the other side. I had to sit in it, understand what it was, and then slowly but surely begin to make adjustments and work towards acceptance, right? So,
mhm,
one of the things, and I'm kind of jumping around here, stages of grief. And the end stage of grief is acceptance. And it's accepting that the fact that I can't change what has already occurred, but I'm trying to accept the fact that it has occurred, but I'm trying to develop new healthy ways in order to deal with it. So the pandemic being an example, I think a lot of people wanted to go back to, I can't wait till this is over. And I would
Mhm.
encourage a lot of clients, well, what if it doesn't end much longer than you expected? So now we have to say, I can't wait till it's over, but let me now adjust to what's my new normal. My new normal says that this is what I'm going to be dealing with, right? The stores have closed, and for some of us, maybe the finances have changed, and kids are home, and your wife and your husband is home. I have to find these healthy ways to adjust to it, and that's what I would say: sitting in the trauma as opposed to trying to force our way through it. And I think it's very important to understand that trauma is not designed to be this very quick
Hmm.
thing. I mean, we really have to understand it. What can we learn from this situation? What can we change? What some certain things we can't change, right? And
Mhm.
understanding how to deal with it, as opposed to let me just bypass this and get to the end. Because if that was the case, I don't think that we would be the people that we are if we can bypass all the traumas that we've ever experienced. Because I think there's so many life lessons in, you know what, I have to go. This is sort of my go through, if you will. And I think
Absolutely.
it's important to understand that as opposed to, hey, let me just get to the other side. Not really. It just doesn't work that way. Again, even though the human body is designed to, I don't want to feel discomfort at all cost.
I like how you said sitting in the trauma, trying not to bypass it, and that important word process,
Yes.
right? And it's just like if you're going to the gym, when you first start, especially after you had a hiatus after the holidays and you just been sitting around, that first workout may not feel so good,
Hmm.
right? And you may not feel like you want to go back, but then if you keep going back, you'll notice if you're consistent that you'll see some improvements in the way that your body responds to it. And I don't want to oversimplify it because when we're dealing with trauma, when we're dealing with emotions, it could be a lot more than that. But
Hmm.
the main piece here is that of the process. And oftentimes we glorify the end result, whereas the glory is really in the journey. It
Hmm.
really is in the journey. So even if we're comparing from an emotional perspective and a mental health perspective, even to our founders and even our investors, right? Ultimately, everybody's looking for their unicorn or they're looking for their pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But often, when you hear most successful people, the the proof is in the pudding during the journey, during the process. So, when sitting in trauma, what advice do you have for our listeners and for our ecosystem and our founders as far as um, things that they can do in that process as they're sitting with it? Is it something that they should be talking to someone? Is there a certain frequency? Should they be writing something? What should they be doing?
Well, number one, I think identification, right? I think it's very important that um, we identify that something is wrong. And I think a lot of us, when we talk about traumas, we know that things are wrong. I think our body will alert us that something is wrong. But I think there still, unfortunately, lies this stigma that, you know what, something is wrong, and I'll just kind of push my way through it. And then we normalize living with this trauma. So sitting with it and living with it, in my mind, is two different things completely,
Oh,
right?
okay. Wait. Slow down, slow down. That was gems right there. Rashad was dropping gems. So you said living with it and sitting with it are two totally different things.
Yeah, living with it to me says long term, that I have made this a part of my long term, my entire life. I'm just going to live with this particular thing. Sitting with it means says that it's momentary in nature, but it's momentary, but yet I'm making progress. I'm sitting with it, but
Mm.
yet I'm identifying that something is wrong and I do have the ability to change it. Living with it says, all right, this is my new normal for the rest of my life, right? So, number one, identification. You said, should we talk to somebody? Absolutely. I think that we're talking about black and brown people, and we're talking about men and women in different spaces, no matter what the space is. So, we're talking about a tech oriented space today. I think that it is very important that we understand that there are so many avenues for us to get help. I mean, so many avenues. And I think as black and brown people, we have to take advantage of them because it's no longer, hey, this is for white privileged America
Yeah.
therapy. I think that it's there, right? It's literally there for us to take advantage of, all kind of programs for us to take advantage of therapy. We see these commercials with the representation is still not where I would like it to be, but you see people that look like LaKisha and Rashad on commercials talking about, hey, I had a bout of depression, I had a bout of anxiety, but yet due to this particular app or this therapist, now I can get better. So yes, identification. So we identified and then we take action. That means to see a therapist, right? Psychology today is it's a great resource. There are therapy for Black men. Therapy for
Sure.
Black girls is another resource. And there's so many resources where in terms of representation, I could see somebody that looks like me that I feel like that I can relate to, that I can go talk about what I'm actually dealing with. And once you in line with that person, then as a therapist, our job is to give the individuals that we work with tips, tools, and strategies to help them navigate the trauma. It's not to be judgmental. It's not to change the person. It's to say, hey, LaKisha, why did you come to therapy? Hey, Rashad, this is what I'm dealing with. And my job is to help walk you through this therapeutic process by providing you these tools, because no matter the trauma, I don't think individuals have to live with it forever. And I don't think, to be honest with you, they have to just sit with it by themselves.
Yes.
Sitting with it means, you know what? My therapist is the person that can sit with me while I navigate this very traumatic time. So it's very important for your listeners to understand that sitting doesn't mean just by yourself, that it means, you know what? I'm sitting with it, but my therapist or another trained professional of some sort can sit with me and help me navigate this process.
I love it. You again dropped so many different gems, and we're going to talk about those tips, tools, and strategies, additional things that we can incorporate. But I need to talk to the ecosystem really quickly because often, if you talk to me directly or so somebody else has talked to me, they know that I am incredibly protective of our founders, and
Mhm.
I likened it to being mother hen of all of the wearable tech founders, and it's getting to the point where I can no longer do that one on one. So I'm able to amplify that notion of taking care of the ecosystem through this platform, through the Wearable Takeover podcast. And that's why it's so important that you're not only listening to these episodes, but that you're sharing them and rewatching them and taking notes and following up with professionals that I have right here because I trust these people. I've known these people for years. And let me give a personal example. So while building this wearable tech ecosystem, many of you can look at all the articles where the ideation started coming about in 2015, started with the self-funding in 2016. But I actually started this as a result of being on my bed and recovering from surgery. Okay, so
Mm.
that's number one. Number two, while going through this process, I was also helping to care for my grandmother out of state, and then she passed away in 2017. So I took a break. So when people talk about why did it take so long, what was happening? So, in the midst of that, while trying to work, as many of our founders do, because many of them are unable to focus solely on their startup, so they have to work on another stream of income and then juggle that dynamic, right?
Mhm.
But then also dealing with family dynamics. And so you may not be taking care of your grandmother. You could be, caring for a spouse. You could be caring for children or other family members. That's a real dynamic. And so I benefited from going to grief therapy. And so I went to in person as well as virtual grief therapy. And then to add to it, at the end of 20, let me see, this was 2022. So at the end of 2021, my line sister passed away from cancer.
Mm.
And my advisors, all of our main advisors from Wearable Tech Ventures, they were aware of what was happening because I communicated to them. So I want to share this with any advisor, any mentor, any company or investor. Um, I need you to develop a relationship that is beyond surface level with our
Mm.
founders, especially in this time frame, because one, we're people, we're human, but then also things are changing rapidly. And ultimately, this is home. Wearable Tech Ventures and this Wearable Takeover podcast is home. And so we need to make sure we're taking care of home. So, Rashad, what advice do you have for our investors, for our advisors, other coaches within our ecosystem? What are some things that they should look for? if they start to notice a change in behavior, and how should they address that? Because I will tell you that my key advisors, they did say, hey, we noticed a change. Are you okay? You need to take a break.
hmm I think it's really looking for that, right? Changes in behavior, right? Behavioral changes. So if a person is normally one that you have a lot of access to them, and all of a sudden you notice that this person is isolating more, or they're withdrawing more, or the quality of, their work changes at all, right? I
Hmm.
think that's very important. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is reach out. And I know it says some of the people may say, Rashad, I want something more in depth. But I think reaching out is one of the basic things that we can do. So you talk about that you were going through, right? Some things. If you hadn't made people aware, nobody would have known what
Yeah.
LaKisha was doing. So I think it's reaching out. And hopefully I'm not stealing your thunder by going to this place, because I think we'll talk about it later on. This gentleman, Twitch, the DJ, hopefully I got his
Yes.
name correct,
Yes.
that um, what if somebody had reached out? And, we all signs indicate that he was still happy and everything was okay. But to me as a therapist, sometimes I think there are signs that are there, but we just don't know them until after the fact. And it may be just a text message, it may be just a phone call. And again, sometimes people present one way and they have a different internal experience, which leads them to go down that unhealthy and unfortunate path of
Mhm.
dying by suicide. But I think it's so incredibly important that we do reach out. Now we talk about tech spaces and people that are entrepreneurs, that a lot of the work that they do are by themselves. They're working late hours, they're up early in the morning, and a lot of them are not going into a 9 to 5 office where people can instantly see a change in LaKisha's behavior. You know what? Develop a list of people that, hey, I need to reach out. I developed lists where, I'm going to reach out to this person. Haven't heard from you. I'm going to reach out, and I'm going to go beyond allowing you to give me surface level answers. Man, how are you? I'm good. Well, what does that mean? I go a little bit deeper. And I think a lot of times people are waiting for people to call them and go to that place, but we don't. Like, I don't allow my clients to say, and it's like a running joke between my clients and I, how are you? I'm good. I always say, what does that mean? Your food is good, but how are you?
Yes.
And it's going a little bit deeper. So for the people that are listening, if there's somebody that that they haven't talked to, that's in this entrepreneurial space, particularly because a lot of the work is done by themselves, reach out. How are you? Can we meet for lunch? And don't allow people to give you surface level answers. Now, it's not that you become overly intrusive and nosy, but I think sometimes we got to go a little bit deeper, asking about how's the kids, how's the family, how's the business. And one of the things that I challenge all of my clients to do with other people is ask the question, what do you need from me? How can I show up for you?
That's
How can I
good.
show up? How can I show up for you? Because by asking a question, or what do you need from me? Now what I have done is I haven't allowed you to give me just a surface level answer. I have placed the onus on you to give me something a little bit deeper.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on, Rashad. So maybe we need to have that as like a quarterly reminder.
Mhm.
Have you asked how can I show up for you? That's such a powerful question.
How can I show up for you? What do you need from me? And I'll share something really quickly, and how important that is. Just let's say 21 days ago, 3 weeks ago, I had prostate cancer surgery. And
Yeah.
I had this surgery, and again, I'm a therapist, and the practice that I work for, Hopeful Counseling, my dear sister, Dr. Lenise Stevens, owns a practice, phenomenal mental health practitioner, just a great person. Just she's a sister to me. And the following day, get out of surgery, come home, and she calls me and she said, "Hey, what do you need?"
Mm,
And me, my initial reaction is, "I'm good." And she said, "Rashad, I'm not taking." Literally, she said, "I'm not getting off this phone until you tell me what you need and how can I help you."
mm,
And she put me in a position where I had to put my pride to the side. And you know what? Right now I can't stand over the stove and cook. She's okay. Well, let's do some DoorDash. It's on me. You DoorDash the rest of your meals, and just sort of that thought. Hey, what do you need? How can I be of service? It put me in the position where I had to answer. Now, of course, I could have said, well, nothing. But it's like that question is different as opposed to, are you good? Yeah, I'm good. What do you need? How can I be of service? So I just wanted to share that. It's like it's so important that we show up for each other.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we talk about entrepreneurs. I'm a contractor. I don't go into an office. The majority of my time, I am by myself in front of a screen with a client. If I'm not with a client, then I'm in the house by myself. And so those check-ins that people were, man, I want to call you. Are you good? What do you need? Some people were just stopping by, man. No, you had surgery. It means a world of difference. I'm sure a lot of people that are listening to this podcast, again, the entrepreneurial space is really challenging because a
Yes.
lot of times it can cause you to be isolated. It can cause you to have some late nights and some early mornings. Maybe we don't know where that next check is coming from. I have to show
Mhm.
up and produce in order for, me to receive income. So it's mental health is there for everybody, but I'm so glad you invited me on. And I know I'm talking, but I get excited about this
Yeah.
is that for people that are classified as entrepreneurs or contractors, it is a little bit different. And I started to notice it for myself pandemic, even moving up until this time. I mean, I'm in the house most of the time, with my clients, and I have to force myself to go out and walk around the neighborhood, get exercise, and all of these different things. So I know I talked a lot, but
I love it. What we're going to recap, but you spoke truth. You spoke facts that our audience needed to hear. And so let me just address healing wishes. We're sending them
I appreciate it.
your way. And so you have family here at Wearable Tech Ventures. And so we're going to make sure we check on you and see if there's something that we could do to maybe even develop on your behalf as you are matriculating through your journey. So one of the key things you mentioned for our advisors, our investors and whatnot, right? And let me just say this before I go into the list. These are folks in position of authority, if you will. Some might consider that. And so what I'm basically putting the onus on these folks to do is to be a little bit more humble
Mm-hmm.
during this season. And I know oftentimes we want the founders reaching out to us. We want to see how many times they're going to reach out and ignoring their emails. We're not doing that here at Wearable Tech Ventures. Okay. So I need the mind to shift. The culture overall is going to shift. We're a different type of ecosystem. Often when I talk to founders, and you'll hear it on one of our very first podcast episodes, one of the founders said, "You are the first investor that was truly interested in me as a founder." And so that's something that we want to not only introduce, but uphold. We need to uphold that culture here. So, Rashad, I heard you say, develop a list, right? So you're saying develop a list for checking in. And some of that check in may not even be, you may be developing a relationship or getting to know someone. So that check-in could be sending some information relevant to that
Mm-hmm.
founder or what the type of work that they're doing to develop that rapport, right? It could be, oh, I heard you say this or I saw this. Let me share this with you. It could be checking in and saying, how's your progress going for Q1? Right? Do you need me to look over something? Providing that space where that founder doesn't feel all alone. Okay. So I heard you say that checking in. What else am I missing? Key questions, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Key questions. And those two key questions again are,
How can I be of service to you, and what do you need from me?
how can I be of service to you? And what do you need from me? So those are key questions that I would like to see us all employ 2023 and beyond. And then for our founders and for folks that are innovators, you may not be the founder, you may be an innovator working on a team, or maybe you're aspirational in that realm. It's very important that you schedule some time for yourself.
Mhm.
Schedule
Yes.
some blocks of time to get outside and see the sunlight. During the pandemic, I would text and call my advisors and say, I'm just getting out of the house. I'm only driving around the block a couple of times, but I had to get out of the house, right? And we would laugh about it, but they knew that I had to do something to make sure I changed my environment. So those are some simple things. And then, of course, you can meet us on the app, but I got to give them a shameless plug, Rashad. And maybe you'll have to join us if we use that book as one of our features for our Founders and Leaders book and podcast club. But that's a virtual environment where you don't necessarily have to work about what you're doing day to day in your business. You'll get some tools for personal development, but it's a community. And so
Mm.
I think it's incredibly important that sometimes you take a little brain break from working on that specific problem, coming to a community that isn't so much pressure, and so that you can release and then find people or just have a regular conversation and then go about your day. So, Rashad, what are some other examples of community that perhaps our ecosystem can look into? And what are some ways that they can develop their own community as they're navigating through these unforeseen times?
That's a great question. So, in terms of community, obviously you can start with family and friends, right? But you have to be very careful that the community with family and friends, it's the one that you want, right? Family and friends can have
Yes.
some negative slash toxic parts there. So you just want to be mindful. I always tell people to start community, the closest community that you have, because I think it's the easiest. They're more accessible. That they're right there, right? And
Hmm.
so family, friends, if you have religious institutions, religious groups that are part of your community, I think that's extremely helpful. I like, because I'm a really active guy, I like the community of movement, the community of
Yes.
movement, gym, anything that's considered helpful. It's a gym. It's swimming. I got a road bike last year and was on the road and met guys that I would wake up in the morning, Saturday mornings, we would ride the bike 15, 20 miles. And so all of these different things are communities that we can find, but I think with community, I think that we have to initiate it a lot. So a lot of times it's people say, well, I don't have access to a community. I think you do, but I don't think that you have made the necessary steps to put yourself in these positions and make yourself vulnerable enough to be exposed to these communities. I think there are communities out there, right? There are certain communities on social media, if that's interest that you have, right? Google it. There's, all kind of communities socially that are right in our respective neighborhoods that we haven't taken the time to even research. So those are some ideas that I would think community. And here's the other thing too, with community, it's always important to, like, if you can, partner up things that you are interested in
Hmm.
and find the community. So if I am interested in, if I wanted to find, and I'm just making this up, a black girls tech community in my neighborhood, maybe I can Google it. Maybe there's one, in the neighboring cul-de-sac. I don't know, but Google it. It's a community, and plus it's something of interest. And if I can merge what I'm already interested in, and then I can find a community that has that same interest, then that's really, really healthy, because I think all of us need these outlets. You're talking about getting the car and driving around the block during the
Yes.
pandemic. I think that we all need them. Entrepreneurs, we need to be able to step outside of the house and find that community, whether no matter what it is. I think we all need those healthy outlets.
I love all the gems that you just dropped again. And let me put a little shameless plug in here, Rashad. So in those original notes, when we were planning out the podcast and I wrote the vision for it, we were originally supposed to have a pre-show in the metaverse. So for any of you listening, and you might be saying, hey, I don't have a community, and perhaps you're interested in that and joining us as like a pre-show host or hostess or whatnot, let us know over here at Wearable Takeover podcast, so that we can get that rolling as well. So it's really fun. We can even attend concerts and things in there. I know being in the metaverse sure did keep my sanity during the pandemic. But
Mhm.
going back to some of those examples, we've had some recent tragedies, and there's tragedies that are happening, every day, from instances in parks and grocery stores, but then even folks that ultimately. Have suffered in silence too long.
Mhm.
And like you said, Twitch, and then there was the Kelsey, I believe her name was. She was the Miss America or the Miss USA,
Mhm.
so with her demise. So, Rashad, what are some things that we could look for? I know you mentioned that people become withdrawn, but for those that tend to have a smile on their face, right? Because we know that being in this innovation space, it can be a pressure cooker.
Mhm.
There's a lot of juggling, and of course, founders know. typically that those that are upbeat or whatnot, they want to be the energy that the advisors and investors want to be around. But I think there's also a space for truth. So that was a loaded question because I'm just thinking about it as we're talking. Um, but is there a way to identify, a particular challenge with someone who may be smiling all the time, or is that just not possible?
That's a great question. And it's a loaded question, but it's a good loaded question. Here's why. If I'm going to be 100% honest with you, I don't think that you can identify everybody who is actually suffering,
Okay.
because there are those individuals that, you see them every day, and it almost looks like that they are living the greatest life imaginable. Everything is working in an ideal manner, but deep down inside they are suffering, so you don't know. And so that's why I think that it's so important just to have the random check-ins,
Hmm.
because that random check-in could be the difference between that person smiling,
Yes.
right, going to a place that it's unfortunate and they can't come back from, as opposed to them not actually going there, because you just don't know. Now, again, typically, you do the research how to identify that somebody is, potentially a candidate to die by suicide. It could be this person is withdrawn and all these different things that we mentioned earlier, but that's not always the case. It is the individual who appears to be upbeat and looks like they have the perfect job and the perfect house and the perfect kids and marriage and all of these things, and that's the individual that's going to go to that unfortunate place. So I always encourage people, I think, just the general check-ins, because you really never know. There are some things that are more obvious and visible in some people, but
Hmm.
that's not the case with a lot of people. And for some reason, I don't know why, it just came up in my mind. Robin Williams,
Yes.
this exceptional comedian,
Yes.
financially he was, a Hollywood superstar, but
Yes.
we never knew that he was, all of the laughter was a facade for obviously the pain, that internal pain that he was experiencing. So there are some people that we're just not going to be able to pinpoint. And across the board, in my circle, again, I have some people that without fail, I'm going to check in on you, regardless of how many great social media posts that you have.
Yes.
I'm going to check in, because maybe that could be the difference in saving a life.
Absolutely. I love it. And so we have founder ambassadors who kind of serve as the representatives of, the founder innovators within our ecosystem. And so I encourage you to reach out to them if you can't reach me or somebody else. But if someone notices a change in behavior, who should they contact? Whether they're the one that's identifying something, that's one. And then two, if someone themselves feels like that they need to reach out for help, where should they go?
Gotcha. So if you notice that a person, that's a change in behavior, and you have the rapport with that individual, my first thing would be, let's see how we can get this individual in therapy. And I'm not expecting anybody to act as if they are a therapist, but if you feel that individual is unstable, and we're talking about suicidal, homicidal ideations, anything of that nature, in their respective area, 311 emergency petition. It's not an instance where the police will come out as if it's, a crime has been committed, but they can come out, and with emergency petition, literally, I'm gonna say escort, but assist this person in going to a facility, typically about 2 or 3 days, right? A psychiatric facility. Many hospitals have a portion of the hospital for it, or there might just be a separate place for it, and get them stable. First and foremost, that's what we're talking about. Making sure that that person is stable. Now, if an individual presents themselves, if they're having some challenges, but you feel like they're not a threat to themselves or anybody else, then it would be working with that individual to get into a therapist ASAP. And I know that's a much longer process, but it's not a middle ground. It's like, if you're unstable, let's get you in to make sure that you are secure enough to be alive, number one. And then if you do present as being stable enough, how can we get you to through a therapist? And again, some of the avenues, right? Psychology Today, therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. There's a wonderful organization that I was a part of called Men to Heal, where they
Mhm.
provide pro bono therapy, 8 sessions to men.
Really?
Yeah, 8 sessions to men. And then if you decide that you want to stay connected with that therapist After the eighth session, then it would be a matter of insurance. This is a wonderful organization. I've been able to work with them. And so there are a bunch of organizations out there. So it really is, and again, I don't want anybody to play the role of a therapist, but as best you can assess, is this person safe in this moment? Because if you feel they're not safe in that moment, then 311 to get them to a place where they can be properly taken care of and try to get them stable ASAP.
I love it. And 311 is it for those of you in the US, that's the number that you can call. If you are not in the US, again, Rashad already presented some other options, such as Psychology Today and other organizations where you could check their website and look for some emergency contact numbers there in that instance. So I think that's incredibly helpful, Rashad.
LaKisha, can I just jump in for 1 second? Because I would be remiss if I didn't say this. 988 as well. That's the suicide. That's the sort of this national suicide and crisis lifeline. 988, and it was a big movement because it literally just changed recently. So 988. That's the National Suicide Prevention Line. Obviously 24/7, 365. So 988. If you feel like that an individual is completely unstable, you don't have any options, 988 is something that I encourage everybody listening to the Wearable Takeover podcast to have embedded in your mind, because that can be really, really helpful.
That's wonderful. So 311 and 988. And of
Yep.
course, we're not done, Rashad, but do you have a website or where people can find you if they're like, you know what? We like hearing this guy. We want to talk to him some more. How can
Yeah.
they reach out
Yeah.
to you?
Absolutely. The best way to reach out to me, I'm just so open and candid with everybody. I'm actually giving everybody my email address for the practice that I work for. I mean, immediate access. It's Rashad, Rashad, at hopeful, HOPEFUL counseling.org. Hopefulcounseling.org. That is the email address. Email me if you are interested in therapy, potentially speaking engagements, whatever that may be. That's probably the best way to contact me. And I make myself available. The turnaround time is pretty quick. And I always try to get back to people and assist them in any way I can. So Rashad at hopefulcounseling.org. And obviously social media, Rashad Bowtie Mills on, and for people listening, why the bow tie? Bow tie is just like, it took a life of its own at some point. So it was like Rashad Bowtie Mills. It's like my unofficial middle name. But certainly you can find me there on Instagram and then Facebook. And then you can see daily I'm dropping motivational messages as well.
Absolutely, and I love that. So that's the resource I wanted to get to. Let's talk a little bit more about Rashad Bowtie Mills because he has an amazingly inspirational social media presence. And if you're someone that might be going through a transition, maybe you're apprehensive about the new year, or facing a challenge of raising around, and you could be feeling that pressure, go visit his page. I promise you, there is some message, whether it be on his main page or in his stories, that will uplift you, whether it's coming from his lips or something else that he is sharing. I want to call him like our male Oprah.
Listen, I'm going to receive it. You get a car. You get a car. You get a car. I'm going to receive it.
And I love it. And he was doing the running and stuff. But then, Rashad, you also have a book.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes.
you have a book. And where what's the name of your book and where can folks get your book?
Yes, you can go to Amazon.com to get my book. My book is called Inmate 458627, A Man's Story of Mental Health, Love, Hurt, and Healing. In
Mm.
2019, I had an incredible life-altering experience. And I'm going to be honest, I'm a very candid person. I actually went to jail for 101 days. And it you talk about humility, and how this experience shaped me. It just changed me for so many reasons for the better, but it's an incredible experience. And I think when people actually get the book, that they can see that you can overcome anything. You can literally overcome anything. And it's about your perspective about the situation. I just share this really quickly. When I went in, I'm just like, I'm shook. I am literally like shook. What in the heck has happened? And my thought instantly became, I refuse to let my story end this way, So a month in, I began to literally write the book in my mind, and I began to take little pieces of scrap paper and little what they call a flexi pen. You're not allowed to have a full-fledged pen in the jail, used as a weapon. And I would
Mhm.
take this flexi pen, and at night, in the dark, I would scribble notes about my experience, and it just formulated itself into the book. So I never view my experience now. It's like I went to jail. It's like, but it's like I went to jail and I became an author as a result
Yes.
of this experience. So it's really not what you go through. It's how you turn that for your greater good. And that's how I became an author.
I love it, and we have many examples of folks that have been able to turn lemons into lemonade. When you look at
Hmm.
the example of Nelson Mandela, when you look at the example of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.,
Hmm.
and his letters from Birmingham. Actually, that has been referenced in. There was a CEO accelerator we just completed, and that tool was referenced as something that most entrepreneurs and business owners should look at and study as they're developing their strategies and developing their goals for the new year. And so, you know what, there's something else. You don't know this, Rashad, but folks here, if you are in the DMV or if you're in LA or whatnot, there's an organization called The Gathering Spot. And so it's like a private club
Mm.
focused on African American professionals and entrepreneurs. And there was a tech founder who has been making waves, and I cannot remember the name of his company, but I do know that he did something where it allowed you to take photos, put it on postcards, and the premise was to send them to your loved ones incarcerated.
Mm.
And he came up with the concept because he himself was incarcerated, and he was incarcerated for 5 to 7 years. And now
Mm.
here's this man that has raised millions of dollars as a startup tech founder. So
Mm.
he was able to turn that pain and that position into something of promise. And so, for those of you that are listening, regardless of what you may be going through, you may not have the exact same background, you may not have the exact same scenario, but ultimately, what are you going to do in that process, right?
Mm.
And so there are so many resources, there are so many success stories, but it all happened in the process. So if you're still breathing, don't give up in the process. Call
Mm.
311-988, email Rashad, reach out to an accountability partner, or just be really vulnerable. And I want to challenge everyone to practice that vulnerability and that humility, because it's going to help you, is also going to help us. And ultimately, our ecosystem is going to be one that will be the model for others to model, right? As we move forward. So, Rashad, I always love chatting and talking with you. We could go for another hour. I know we could just sit here chatting it up. It's always a great time. And so I'm going to ask you on air because I ask people a lot of things on the spot, but I would love for you to come back and work with us this summer as we're dealing with our youth. We have a youth camp and a hackathon, and so that's going to be hybrid, in person and virtual. So I would love for you to work with us as we, develop that again this summer. And in addition to that, what are some key takeaways or some last minute notes of wisdom that you can share with our listeners?
Sure. Number one, I would love to be a part of that, working with the youth in any capacity. So my answer will be an unequivocal yes.
Thank you.
And I would just want your listeners to walk away with, by the time they hear this will be 2023. I just want people to know that it's very important to monitor the nature of our thoughts.
Hmm.
2022 was one of the most challenging years that I ever endured in my life. And I noticed that when I felt better about what I was experiencing, it was really based on the nature of my thoughts. And very quickly, I'll just say this. There's a principle, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's a simple connection of based on how I think dictates how I feel, and then subsequently I behave. And it's all connected to the thought. So monitor the nature of your thoughts and be prepared to reframe your thoughts and find the good in every situation. And it's not a cliche. That's the difference in those that do make it as opposed to those that don't. It's the nature of our thoughts.
As a man thinketh, so he is.
Yes. Yes.
Rashad, I'm so excited. Again, can you repeat your social media handle and your email address so folks can reach out to you?
Sure, Rashad, Rashad at hopefulcounseling.org. That's the best and most effective way to reach me via email. And then social media, Rashad Bowtie Mills. Yes, Bowtie. Just like the fashion statement, Rashad Bowtie Mills, Instagram and Facebook. And yes, if you're in need of motivation, I try to drop messages every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, just to give people encouragement.
I love it. So for ecosystem builders, if you need a speaker, I highly recommend Rashad Bowtie Mills. Make sure you reach out to him for some paid speaking engagements. And then we'll also place a link to your book in the show notes, Rashad. And then you know what? Cheers to a new year. I got to ask you one more thing before we go.
Sure, sure.
What should some folks do? Because people say new year, new me, right? And so there's no new you in a new year unless you really have a strategy that goes along with those vision boards, goals, and aspirations, right? But what's one thing that you recommend folks do to prepare for the new year, whether it's New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, or it could be February, it could be March, right? What's one thing that they could do?
Sure, that's a great question. It's actually a message I'm gonna drop later. I think we spend so much time focusing on this, this cliche, as you stated, the new year, the new me. I'm gonna cut this person off. I'm not bringing this in, and I think it's space and value for that. But what if the new year was your launching pad? That was your
Mhm.
opportunity to take flight, and you had destiny assigned to the new year. And destiny is like I'm getting on a plane and I'm going to a new place. We spend so much time focusing on what we can't get through TSA as opposed to, you know what? Focusing on what I need to bring with me to get on this new plane that I'm going in the space. It's so much of our time is I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. But what if we doubled down on what I am going to do or what I want to take with me? There's some valuable things that you learned in 2022 that I want you to take in 2023. But yet we're still in this space that I'm not taking this and I'm not taking that. And I think that that's like a scarcity mindset. Let's
Mhm.
operate from a place of a surplus. This went well in 2022, despite whatever you went through. And I could still take these things into 2023 and double down on the things that really went well. And I'll say this, and I really get excited about this. And the reason why this is so near and dear and important to me is because we don't understand the value of thought. There
Yes.
are some things that really went well for everybody listening to the Wearable Takeover podcast in 2023. And I want to force you to focus on what went well as opposed to what didn't go well.
Yes.
Because if I do that, then now what I'm saying is, you know what? I can't take this through TSA traveling into this new year. However, I can take this and I want to double down on the positives as opposed to the negatives.
I love it. Focus on the positives and come from a place of surplus or abundance. Folks,
Yes.
are
Yes.
you excited for season 2 of the Wearable Takeover podcast?
I am. I am.
Make sure you check us out, and our social media. We're still getting that back up, folks. So you'll see some tags as to where to find us, but you can always find us on LinkedIn under Wearable Tech Ventures. You can always find us Wearable Tech Ventures on Instagram, and our other social media pages will be back up. Or by the time you hear this, you could go ahead and just look for it and look for my name or look for one of our sponsors, and you'll see some tags to the episode. Are you ready, Rashad?
I am ready. I am ready.
Let's go. Thank you so much, folks.